Welcome back to another Reddit readings video. If you enjoy these stories, don't be scared to leave a like. Now, do be scared. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. I found a strange medical textbook washed up on a beach. Not sure what to make of it. Hey y'all, I was walking my dog, see photo for the lil cutie today at the beach near my house when I saw a book wrapped in some sort of plastic-like material, sticking out the mud, sand. It's technically a salt marsh, but it's basically a beach at high tide. Low tide it gets muddy. It unwrapped pretty easily and is in shockingly good condition considering it's a book that I found sort of in the ocean. But that's not the confusing part. What confuses me is that it's a medical book filled with diseases and animals that I'm fairly certain don't exist. I googled a few of them and I got bupkies. It seems pretty official, is bound really well, and clearly from a while ago, so it seems unlikely that it's either some weird craft project or a modern one-off gag book or something. I dunno, I'll admit, it's kind of freaking me out. It just seems so real. Here's a few photos of it and an x-ray I found stuffed between one of the pages. Photos. One of the listed diseases. I think the x-ray must be related. Parasite is an often fatal illness caused by the adolescent marionette octopus, a small parasitic octopus found exclusively in temperate climates, with the highest concentration being off the coast of Massachusetts in the northeast United States Atlantic Ocean. Unknown prior to the wreck, it is believed to have spread during, but data thus far is inconclusive. The octopus finds a host through either the consumption of unclean drinking water or the washing of infected ocean water into the sinuses or ears. Given its small size of 1 to 2 millimeters, it can easily be mistaken for a large grain of sand and accidentally ingested. Once inside the body, it travels along the olfactory nerve if in the sinuses, throat, or the inner ear canal if in the ear. From there, it burrows into the brain tissue until it reaches the hypothalamus. While certainly painful for the host, it's generally reported as no more painful than a sinus infection and is often mistaken for one. How the octopus knows where to burrow is currently unknown. After it reaches the hypothalamus, it begins excreting high concentrations of both ghrelin, inducing a constant state of hunger in the host, and a unique protein that mimics the host's own tissue, preventing an immune response. The octopus also produces an anti-nausea neuroleptic-like chemical to prevent the host from vomiting, encouraging even more rapid eating. The metabolism of the host reduces sharply following an infection, and weight gain is typically substantial. The tongue and throat are frequently calloused and white, the jaw may swell, and the stomach distends. Speech is difficult because the octopus floods the brain with potent dopamine analogs. Friends and family concerned about this strange behavior are met with extreme resistance from the host, and thus, self-isolating is not uncommon, nor is violence. The high mortality rate is, surprisingly, unrelated to patient resistance, however, and instead the inability to kill the octopus while leaving the host unharmed. As the octopus grows, its arms spread and push through the brain. Should the octopus die at any stage beyond its initial journey into the brain, the comprehensive integration of the octopus within the brain's structure quickly leads to tissue necrosis and death. Attempts have been made to surgically remove the octopus, but all have been unsuccessful. The octopus creates a suction-like hold on wherever the arms grow, and external movement of the arms results in immediate and massive hemorrhaging as the host's body begins to deteriorate from the near constant and extreme caloric intake. Post-mortem examinations almost always indicate a near-complete destruction of liver and pancreatic tissue. The host will seek relief in the ocean. Reasons given by the host for traveling to the ocean vary. Interviews with infected patients are inconsistent, but the sense of impending doom should they stay on land is universal. Consequently, attempts to restrain and prevent a host from fleeing should always be considered with extreme caution. As to the host, it is literally life or death. Chemically, it's not fully understood how the octopus is able to manipulate the host in this way. What is understood is that the octopus uses adrenaline in large quantities to cause the fight or flight response and state of increased agitation. It is able to shift the chemical response to hydration of the host, convincing them to seek water. It will raise the body temperature of the host to near fatal levels, forcing the host to find a method to cool themselves. But despite all these known chemical manipulations, how it causes the extreme fixation on ocean water specifically is very much still a mystery. When the host reaches an ocean body, they will use the last of their energy to swim out no less than a mile from shore. Once a sufficient distance is reached, we can only assume the octopus is able to detect the differences between deep versus shallow ocean water. The host will lay face down in the water until they drown. The now adult octopus will exit through the nose and re-enter through the belly button, splitting itself in two. While one half initially withers and shrinks dramatically, this decline is quickly reversed, and the two halves rapidly grow into two separate and distinct full-size adult octopods. Note, interestingly, the adolescent marinette octopus has two separate genomes, one being inactive throughout most of its life. When it physically splits, one half activates the second genome and deactivates the first set. Its initial shrinkage is believed to be from the repair needed after this activation. After reaching their full size, the two octopods mate and typically lay hundreds of thousands of eggs within the body cavity, each egg having up to 50 viable embryos. The male octopus dies almost immediately after copulation and the female follows soon after egg laying. The eggs hatch within a week and use the body as their first source of food. From there, they swim back to shore to find a suitable host. Because of the rapid response needed for effective treatment, any patient complaining of sinus pain or ear pain with a recent history of Atlantic Ocean water swimming should immediately be given an X-ray to rule out a marinette octopus infection. Weird, right? If anyone recognizes anything, definitely let me know. I'd feel better knowing this is just some weird fan fiction. There's like a whole book of this bizarro shit too, so I can post a few more if it might jog anyone's memory. Update 8:14 p.m. EST. So glad I'm not in this alone. Makes me feel much less freaked out. I really want to post some more of the book, borrowing a negative scanner from a friend tomorrow, but I'm working late tonight, so sadly, it'll have to wait until tomorrow. I'll make a new post so it's easier to follow, or I can just post it here. Not sure what the protocol is, but regardless, thanks for making me feel less alone in all this, and updates to follow. Some say it's an urban myth, but I think it's happening to me. Never in my wildest dreams or nightmares really would I have ever thought that this could actually happen to me. How could this happen to anyone? When you start to get followed by a person, a stranger that appears everywhere you go and just smiles at you. It's an uncanny feeling of impending doom. It's that voice in your head screaming at you that something just isn't quite right. It's the intuition that kicks in and desperately pleads with your brain, telling you, you gotta get out of here, man. Run, run, run as fast you can, but what am I even running from? Delusions, hallucinations, or something much more real and much more sinister. Everywhere I go, there it is, smiling at me in the corner. Everywhere I look, there it is, smiling at me in the distance. Every time I turn my head, there it is, smiling at me, again and again and again. Even when I close my eyes, there it is, burnt into my brain, smiling at me from behind my eyelids. When I go to sleep at night, there it is, smiling at me in my dreams. And it's not always the same person, and I don't even know if it's real anymore. In fact, I'm starting to think it's not real, that it's just a figment of my deranged imagination, or a part of my fucked up subconscious. It was when I was visiting a friend at work that I first noticed it. A woman smiling menacingly at me in the corner of his office. Who is that? I texted him from my phone. He looked up from his phone notification and laughed. What are you talking about? I was confused, so I took a picture on my phone to send him discreetly. But the photo was empty, just an office wall with no one standing there. I couldn't believe my eyes. I slapped myself across the face, pinched myself, thinking I was losing the ability to tell what was real and what wasn't. What if I walked over to her and touched her? Would I feel her there? Or would my hand just go through her? I was starting to really lose my cool and couldn't focus on anything but the woman in the corner. And the woman continued to stare, and I swear she was looking right into the depths of my soul, her smile growing more evil with each passing moment. I couldn't stand looking at her, but at the same time I could not look away. It was enchanting almost, like the siren's cry that lures in the sailor, only to devour the soul of the fool foolish enough to be drawn to it. I need to go, I said before quickly rushing to the parking lot. I had to get out of there as fast I could. I didn't even really know why. I just knew I had to leave. When I reached my car and got into the driver's seat, the woman appeared again from 2 parking spaces over. The same stare, the same smile. Here's a cornfield out on Route 127 where they say you can see faces among the corn in your headlights as you pass by. Heavy guitar riffs pulse through the headphones over my ear as I mop, Ozzy had given his introduction as Iron Man, and now Tony was delivering the madness that followed. I spun in circles, strumming out on the wooden handle of the mop as if I were on stage in front of thousands of people. The lights strobed and streaked across the platform as a multitude of hungry fans cried out in unison, desperate to just touch the heel of my boot as if I were a metal messiah offering salvation. The dream was eternal, and I was immortal. Well, it was until my headphones were yanked from my head. Zach, stop acting like a damn fool and get out of here. It's closing time. We'll do it all over again tomorrow. Mark grunted as I spun around. Hey man, just making cleaning a little more fun. You know, with a touch of worship on the Sabbath. I threw him the horns with my hand and stuck out my tongue. Say kid, you know the 70 seconds were like 50 years ago, right? He rolled his eyes and sauntered his girth to the front door. Yeah, a real tragedy. A decade of the best music, forever frozen in time. I sighed as I pulled on my denim jacket. I flipped off the lights and exited the store while Mark held the door open. What am I supposed to listen to? Taylor Swift? I snarled in disgust. The thought nearly made me vomit. Kid, I don't really give a crap what you listen to. See you tomorrow. He gave a wave over his shoulder and crossed the parking lot like a big grouchy grizzly. I checked my smartwatch, 10 after 9. Oh shit, I was going to be late. I hopped in my dad's old Blazer and peeled out of the lot to head north towards Jessica's. Hair Nation hummed through the speakers as I sped around the outskirts of town. Quaint houses and hayfields passed by in a blur. I lit a menthol from the pack in my jacket and said a silent prayer that I'd get lucky tonight. It had been a while and I was really feeling that itch. Her house came into view as I crested over the hill she lived on. It was a small brick ranch off Little Fork Road. The grass was entirely too tall, and weeds punched through the gravel in the driveway. Purple thistle flowers swayed gently in the breeze by the mailbox, towering over the carpets of clover. It had been hard for her mom to keep up with things since Jessica's dad had passed away. He'd had a heart attack at work last year. It was a real bummer too. Mr. Peterson had been such a good guy, and I reckoned her mom was doing the best she could. I knocked on the front door and the dog went berserk on the other side. He was a small terrier that didn't care for me too much, which was fine by me. I didn't like him either. He'd made an enemy for life when he had bitten a tiny hole in my ear last summer. There was cursing and the sound of a closet door slamming from inside the house. They always stuffed the dog in there so he wouldn't attack the guests. Vicious little worm that he was. The door swung open and I was greeted by the haggard face of Mrs. Peterson in a pink robe with curlers in her hair. Hey Zach, I really gotta get rid of that damn dog, huh? She chuckled and gave me one of those church hugs. You know, the one where you push your rear end away from the other person so that you came in contact with each other as little as possible. I would get him some therapy at the very least. I smirked as little Terry the Terror scratched at the other side of the closet, growling softly. I'll let Jessica know you're here. Her mom disappeared down the hallway as I poked at the little porcelain dwarves that sat on the mantel. The color was fading on their clothes and their beards felt like the bristles of a toothbrush. They were sort of metal though, because the red paint around their lips had run down their cheeks a bit, looking as if they'd recently cannibalized Snow White. Footsteps thundered down the hallway as I turned just in time to catch Jessica as she leapt in my arms and started kissing all over my face. Hey, take it easy. I laughed, setting her back on the ground. She signed to me with her hands that she had missed me. But I just saw you 2 days ago, I said, running a hand through her auburn hair. Too long, she mouthed. I gave her another squeeze and then pulled back so that she could read my lips. You want to get out of here? I asked. She nodded her head excitedly. I smiled and kissed her forehead. Bye, Mrs. Peterson, I shouted. Bye, guys. Have a good time, but make sure you have her back by midnight. She hollered from the back bedroom. Will do, thank you. We burst through the screen door giggling. I ran around to open the passenger door of the Blazer and helped her climb in before hopping in myself and firing up the ignition. Where are we going? Jessica signed. I thought we could drive around a little while and smoke, then maybe head out to that spot we found by Bear's Mill and fool around a little. I winked. She rolled her eyes but then smiled mischievously and gave me a crude gesture, nodding in agreement. I laughed, threw it in drive and headed back south to the other side of town. Jessica rolled a joint for us, and we passed it back and forth for a while as 80 Seconds metal cranked through the sound system. She held her hand over the speaker on the door so she could listen as well. Her head banged gently to the rhythm of the drums as she squeezed my knee. I came to the intersection of State Road 127 and Hawk Path RD, and before I turned an idea struck me as I idled at the stop sign. Bear's Mill was a few miles to the left, but to the right about 3/4 of a mile down was the field. It was a local legend told to scare kids around the campfire. There's a cornfield out on Route 127 right before you reach the next county where they say you can see faces among the corn in your headlights as you pass by. They say if you look at them for too long, any more than just a glance, then they'd come for you. I didn't believe a word of it, but Jessica was plenty creeped out by the story, and it would be all too fun to watch her squirm as we drove by. I flipped on my blinker and turned to the right. Jessica raised her eyebrows suspiciously. "Where are we going?" she signed. "Just to see if we can't spot some friendly faces." I grinned maliciously as I watched her face turn from confusion to concern once she realized what I'd meant. No way," she mouthed. "Come on, it'll be fun," I jested. She gave me the middle finger in retaliation and slumped down in her seat. Jessica had been born deaf, but she'd never had much trouble with getting her point across. I reached for her hand, but she snatched it away, turning her shoulders towards the window. Whatever, she'd be fine, and we could laugh about it later. I slowed down to a creeping pace as we rounded the bend where town folklore said we'd get a fright. Cornstalk after cornstalk lined up in tight-knit rows as tassels fluttered in the gentle wind. Nothing but ears of corn. I didn't see a single face. Jessica sighed in frustration beside me as I completed the turn. I could tell she was mad at me, which made me feel bad. It wasn't as much fun as I had thought it would be, and I didn't want to piss her off too much before we made it to our makeout spot. So I swung the Blazer around and headed back towards the mill. She'd forgive me by the time we got there, I was sure of it. As I was circling the bend for a second time, I saw something out of the corner of my eye that caused me to slam on the brakes. Something had pushed through a row of corn, revealing itself briefly. "Did you see that?" My heart fluttered as I studied the field. "What?" she signed. I flipped on the spotlight that sat parallel at the driver's window. The Chevy had been a police unit before my dad, and the car had both retired from the force. I swung the light left, then right. Nothing but corn, but I could have sworn I saw something dart through the field. I panned the light left again and then froze. My heart pounded in my chest and the very top of my skull tingled with static. About a dozen slack, emotionless faces stared out at us from in between the cornstalks. They were paper white without noses. Their eyes were solid black and reflected the light like glass. Dull eyes. Jessica slapped my shoulder hard and then silently screamed for me to go. Go. I let off the brake and slammed on the gas. The tires spun, and we lurched forward only a few feet before the engine died. The road faded into darkness as my headlights went out. Shit. I tried to turn over the ignition, but somehow the battery was completely dead. Click. No juice. How can that be possible? I had just replaced the alternator in the spring and the battery was fairly new. What are you doing? We have to go. Jessica continued to sign furiously with her hands moving a mile a minute. I don't know what you're saying. You're signing too fast. I cried. She took a deep breath and mouthed, "What's wrong with the car?" "I don't know. Maybe the battery cable came loose or something. Come shine the light for me so I can check." She shook her head no feverishly. "Come on, it'll be fine. It was probably just a trick of the moonlight. There's nothing out here but us and corn for miles." I tried to rationalize the situation for her benefit and mine. The faces weren't real. We just manifested them in the dark because we were looking for them. The car had died not by some supernatural force. That would be ridiculous. It had to have been the battery cable coming loose. The nut must have shimmied off somehow. I popped the hood and climbed out of the cab, meeting Jessica at the front of the engine block. We took a moment to look around with our phone lights, scanning the rows of corn. No faces, no one, nothing. See, it was only our imaginations, I told myself. But why couldn't I shake this eerie feeling that we were being watched? I opened the hood. The engine looked fine. No steam from overheating, and no loose battery connection. There wasn't any corrosion on the connectors either. Weird. Jessica clung to the side of my body like a tumor, shivering against me. I pulled off my jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She smiled at me sheepishly, but I could tell she was still shook up. I kissed the top of her head and assured her everything was fine before turning back to the SUV. I took a few minutes and poked around at the wires, checked the coolant level in the radiator, and even pulled the dipstick to ensure the oil levels were good. Not that that would have killed the power to the engine, but I was nervous and wanted to make sure everything was kosher so we could get the hell out of here. We quickly jumped back into the Blazer. I made a cross over my body and asked God for a little help, which seemed like a contradiction with my Slayer pentagram t-shirt on, but I figured it couldn't hurt. I turned the key in the ignition. It whined for a moment, but to my delight it roared back to life. I slapped the roof of the cab and let out a yeehaw. Jessica laughed and kissed my cheek. I flipped the knob for the headlights, and as they came on, just before I put it in drive, something darted across the asphalt, something big and low to the ground. Just as my foot pressed the gas, the engine sputtered and died again. "Oh, come on," I shouted. Click, 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 click. "Please, God." Click, 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 click. We both got out again and made our way back to the hood. But before I opened it, Jessica practically climbed up my back, pointing over my shoulder, whimpering as her lips trembled. What is?" The words were caught in my throat as I saw a hulking figure the size of an oak tree shamble towards us through the hayfield. It was too dark to make out its features, but I knew we had to get the hell out of there. It let out a loud groan that sounded like the earth swallowing up a forest. "Fuck this." I grabbed Jessica's hand and went tearing through the cornfield. We ran through the stalks as sticky leaves struck our faces. My legs burned as the soil grabbed at my boots. It was damp and thick like clay and suctioned to the soles with every step. We didn't stop until we poured out into the clearing on the other side of the field. A huge barn sat behind a decrepit 2-story farmhouse. We must be at the old Norman Jeffries farm. I recognized the rusted-out Cheyenne truck sitting in front of the barn. He was the town drunk, and I'd seen it parked at the VFW 100 times. A great commotion rang out from the corn behind us. I spun around and could see the tassels at the top of the stalk shake violently. Something was coming. "Come on." I pulled Jessica towards the barn, running as fast as I could without leaving her behind. We barely made it through the sliding doors before the sky opened up and let down heavy rain. It fell in sheets as lightning cracked in the distance. Jess tapped my shoulder and pointed to the far wall. At the back of the barn at Old Norman, he was in a lawn chair with his head hung lazily about his left shoulder, clutching an empty bottle of whiskey. A moat of crushed beer cans circled his chair. Bluegrass buzzed from the boombox in the corner as he snored loudly. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed over the rain just outside the barn doors. We jumped behind a stack of skids that sat beside square bales of hay. I peeked through the slats of the skids to see a shadow cast against the other wall. It was no shadow from anything I'd ever seen before. The limbs twisted and bent like deciduous tree branches. The movement wasn't rigid like a tree though, it was fluid and almost cat-like. A commotion came from the back of the barn, and I watched as the shadow sprung from the ground all the way up into the hayloft above with ease. A large hand clamped down on both of our shoulders and drug us into the middle of the barn. We went sprawling onto the concrete floor as we were shoved forward. Mr. Jeffries stumbled behind us angrily. "What are you doing on my property?" he snarled. "What the hell, man?" I jumped to my feet and helped Jess to hers. "You shouldn't be here. This isn't some spot for you two to spoon and smoke pot." Norman crossed his arms in disapproval. "We weren't doing any of that. Something chased us in here from the road. We were hiding." "What are you talking about? What chased you?" "I don't know what it was. My car died and we saw faces in the corn. Then something big came after us. We didn't know what to do, so we..." He held up his hand to cut me off, chuckling in disbelief. "Get a grip, kid. That old story. Come on, you're seeing stuff. You've been eating those magic mushrooms tonight." "No, man, it's not like that." I went silent as a face stretched down from the loft, hovering just above Norman's. It was one of many we'd seen in the field. I raised my hand shakily as a tremor ran through my body. My mouth was dry and I couldn't speak, but I pointed behind him. Mr. Jeffries scoffed and turned around to come face to face with it. He fell backwards in shock and scurried on all fours to the side wall. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," he squealed. Its long neck was as black as ink. It stretched like a putty, but I could see muscle fibers beneath the ooze of oil. Lightning struck outside and illuminated its porcelain-like face. It smiled at Norman, revealing rows of teeth like razor blades. He pulled a gun from his overalls and began to fire wildly. It shrieked with anger and lunged at him from the loft. I turned tail and ran with Jessica close behind. We splashed through the puddles in the driveway and ducked behind the old pickup truck. Several more shots flashed from inside the barn, but then suddenly there was silence. I dared to lean out from the side of the truck to get a better view. Silence. Then, two hands emerged to grip the frame of the barn door. White knuckles pulled Norman's face into view. His face was frozen with horror as he locked eyes with me. "Help me," he screamed. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed in place. He crawled out of the barn slowly, his chest dragging through the mud. He was almost clear of the threshold when a massive claw pierced through the back of his rib cage. He cried out in agony as he was slowly lifted in the air. Blood spurted from his mouth as he begged for mercy, but with a twitch from the creature he was sucked back inside the barn in an instant. One last scream of terror rang out from the darkness within. Jessica grabbed the sides of my head, forcing me to turn towards her and mouth, We have to go, now." Her eyes were as big as dinner plates beneath the red hair that was matted to her face from the rain. "Okay," I whispered. We made a dash to the old farmhouse. The creature roared behind us as thunder rumbled overhead. I prayed to a god I didn't believe in to save us as we ran like we'd never run before. I could hear it closing in on us as we reached the back door. It snarled and chomped at the nape of my neck as Jessica twisted the knob. We exploded through the kitchen and slammed the door shut behind us. I wrapped my arms around a shelf full of canned goods and tipped it over in front of the door, barricading us in. Slam! It smacked into the door. Slam! 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 3 more times until I saw its shadow sink away from the curtain. Jess was weeping and groaning, her hands about the top of her head pulling at her hair. I grabbed her and brought her into an embrace. She sobbed into my chest as I racked my brain on how to get out of this situation. What do we do? Board up the house like a fortress and wait until morning? It was as if the creature had read my mind, because right after I had the thought, I heard the sound of a window shatter upstairs. It was in the house. I pushed Jess back. "Look at me." She shook her head no and tried to bury her face in me again. "No, look at me, Jess," I cried. "Okay," she mouthed. "It's in here. I heard it come through the window upstairs just now." She gripped my forearms tightly and her breath quickened. "We need to get out of here. It won't be morning for another few hours. We can't keep running around this farm for that long. It will catch us. We have to get back to the blazer." "Okay." Her head drooped low as tears continued to stream down the freckles on her face. I grabbed her chin and lifted her eyes back to mine. "Okay?" I asked again. She nodded yes. I leaned in and kissed her deeply, like it was for the last time. And it probably was. I broke away and tried to move the heavy cabinet from the door, but it was impossibly heavy. Jess squatted down and yanked. Finally, the two of us were able to pull it away. "Ready?" I asked. She gave me a thumbs up. I heard the creature stampede down the staircase as we flew out the back door once more. Thankfully, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, which allowed us to go a bit faster. We made it to the edge of the cornfield before I looked over my shoulder. It had just exited the house as we disappeared among the sea of stalks. I'd only caught a glimpse of it. It was sleek black and held no true form. Its shape kept changing and rippling in the porch light. It stopped and watched us with its dead eyes as we slipped through the field. As we barreled through the corn, I could hear whooping and hollering. Yips and snapping of jaws ring out from all around us, almost as if a pack of hyenas were hot on our trail. We were the gazelles, and they were the ones who fed in the night. We were being hunted. Just as I thought my lungs were going to explode, we cleared the cornfield. I wheezed as I ran on rubber legs towards the car. The white exterior glinted in the moonlight, and it looked like heaven in the moment, a chance at life. Jessica and I flopped into the cab at the same time. I grabbed the keys and turned them over. The blazer fired up immediately without hesitation. "YHHH." I screeched like a Valkyrie. Jessica pounded her fists on the dash telling me to go, and I floored it, burning rubber on the pavement. We peeled around the bend, and as we did I could see the faces in the corn. Their expressionless, pale faces peppered hauntingly in between the rows. Jess gave them the finger, pressing her hand against the window, but they didn't move, and in another couple of minutes we were far away from there, speeding towards the other side of town. We didn't go home that night. Instead, we drove 2 hours north, all the way to the city, and grabbed breakfast at 4 a.m. in a diner downtown. Neither of us wanted to risk it, and we were already in deep shit for missing curfew. A few more hours wasn't going to change that. Those were the best tasting pancakes I'd ever had in my life. Almost dying really lines up the taste buds. After that day, I avoided that bend on State Route 127 like the plague, going out of my way to go around it if I had to go south for whatever reason. Mr. Norman Jeffries was in the Sunday paper obituaries that week. It only stated that he died suddenly and unexpectedly of unknown causes, but there were rumors all over town that he had gotten hammered drunk and fell into his wood chipper. It was the only explanation for why he was found in tiny pieces. I knew better though. Jessica and I both were accepted to the same college in Michigan the very next summer. It was several hours away from home, which suited us just fine. We never wanted to set foot back in Ohio if we didn't have to. Well, maybe for Christmas, but that was it. We never spoke of what happened again. I think it was just too hard for Jess to talk about, and I tried my very best to forget it ever happened. But sometimes I still had nightmares that reminded me of that night. Sometimes when I slept, I'd see the faces in the corn, watching, waiting. My sister named her baby after my dead wife. When I found out my sister was pregnant, I was happy for her. 8 months later, when she named the thing Mary, I was ready to kill her. Mary was the name of my late wife. She went missing 7 years ago. Emma, my sister, said she did it in her honor, like that somehow changed things. I hid my malice in the beginning, but my family could tell I wanted nothing to do with Emma or her child. The baby was born with a full head of hair, that soft, silky brown hair I knew so well. Its eyes were a brilliant hazel. It never cried, not even when it was born. It had the cutest little giggle, or so I heard. I didn't visit. Emma felt blessed to have such a beautiful, well-mannered child. But I only felt dread. It was the spitting image of my wife. It haunted me. Don't get me wrong, I loved my wife. Mary was the closest thing to an angel on earth. She was warm, funny, and drop-dead gorgeous. Her voice was melodic and her laughter was contagious. When she hugged you, you felt like you were sinking into the softest mattress with the warmest blankets. Her kisses were tender and would ignite a kind of excitement in you, like you were getting your first crush all over again. She could ease your pain just by looking at you. Everyone loved her, and when she chose me, I felt like the luckiest man in the world. I never deserved her. Its first word was hammer. That was its favorite toy. Emma had bought the thing a little toolbox so it could pretend to work with its father. Of everything, it chose the hammer. It would play in the garage for hours, running around and hitting things while yelling bang. My family thought it was adorable. They pressed me to visit, hoping that if I spent some time with the thing I'd warm up to it. Emma spearheaded these efforts, as she had become quite distraught at the thought that her child would never get to know its uncle. Finally, I caved. I had never seen the baby in person, so I decided that might be the cure to my disdain for it. I agreed to spend the weekend over at her house. I'd stay in the guest room and take the toddler out to the park, drive it to daycare, get ice cream with it. Exeter, Emma's husband, was away on a business trip, so it'd take some responsibility off her shoulders. When I arrived, Emma opened the door and immediately greeted me with a hug. I tried to pull away, not being one for physical affection, but she had a firm grip on me. I didn't even notice it trailing behind her, clinging onto her legs. But it had noticed me. Mary was a free spirit. The thickest rope couldn't tie her down. I would become frustrated with her absences, her late nights, her blatant flirting with other men, but immediately forget why I was angry the second she'd cuddle up next to me or kiss me on the forehead. Mary had a way of making people forgive her. That was how the affair was able to go on for so long. The child began wailing at the sight of me. The sound pierced my ears. I yelled at Emma, begging her to shut the thing up. I don't know if she heard me. Her motherly instincts had already kicked in and her attention was honed in on the child she was shushing in her arms. If she did, she didn't say anything. The child quieted down to a whimper. Emma desperately apologized to me, explaining that she never cried like that before. She must have been upset by meeting someone new. She was tired, she was hungry, and so on. I could tell she was worried I would leave, so, against all better judgment, I stayed. After that initial fiasco, the child seemed to adjust to my presence quite well. Too well. It became clingy, following me around for the rest of the day. It would wait outside when I went to the bathroom, watch me from across the room when I had conversations with Emma, and pop out from behind corners to try and startle me, giggling hideously every time. Every time I'd get close to my breaking point, Emma would find some excuse for me to stay. Eventually, it came time to take it to the park. I figured I could just drop it off, drive around in my car while it played with the other children, and pick it up when it was time to go home. I had no interest in supervising it. Everything went to plan at first. I dropped it off, went back to my car, and was about to drive away when I saw something odd. The child hadn't gone up to the other kids. It hadn't even gone to the playground. It was kneeled over, digging in the dirt under a tree. My heart skipped a beat. I threw my car in reverse and sped off. Fuck. My hands were shaking, my head was spinning, and I could barely tell what was going on around me. By some miracle, I was able to pull over on the side of the road, get out of my car, and vomit. Somehow, that thing knew. I was aware that Mary had been cheating on me for a long time, but I never said anything. I wanted to, sure, but every time I was about to protest, she'd throw herself on me and tell me how special I was to her, how she loved me more than anything in the world. So what if she was fucking some other guy? That was just a fling, some physical desire any stranger could satisfy. Her love was reserved for me, and that was all that mattered. Emma called me 2 hours later. She was worried. She wanted to know where we were, if everything was okay. I had calmed down by this point and was able to feign happiness. I said that I was having so much fun playing with the kid that I'd completely lost track of time. I assured her we'd be home soon. The call ended, and my heart sank. I knew I had to go back to the park. I was sweating the entire drive back. If something happened to that child, I'd be in trouble. When I pulled up to the park, I noticed it immediately. The child was still under the tree, just standing there, staring at me. It was holding a hammer in its hand, an old, rusty hammer. It looked me straight in the eyes as I cautiously approached it. Without a word, I snatched the hammer from its grasp and scooped the thing up. I raced back to the car, hurriedly strapped the child into the back seat, and shoved the hammer into my bag. Even after all those years, the handle still had the same grooves from where my hand had worn it down. Mary came home at 2 a.m. That in itself wasn't unusual, but her attitude was. I inquired about her night, but rather than apologizing and showering me in love as per usual, Mary ignored me. That pissed me off. I started shouting at her. She didn't react. I called her names. She put headphones in. I went to grab her arm. She pulled away. I shoved her. She ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I slept on the couch that night. When I woke up, she was gone. I didn't even hear her leave. I went to use the bathroom when a glint of light in the trash can caught my eye. It was her wedding ring. Emma came racing out when I pulled into the garage. Her face was beaming. Not wanting to give myself up, I played along. I unbuckled the kid and helped it out of the car. We ate dinner together and watched TV. Every minute was painful, but if it meant Emma wouldn't be suspicious, it was worth it. I tucked the child into bed that night. I went to give it a kiss on the forehead when it smiled at me. Not just any smile, Mary's smile. I ran out of the room and holed up in the guest bedroom until I calmed down. I got ready for bed and tried to relax. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were racing and my mind was scattered. I got out of bed to use the restroom, and when I returned, Mary was waiting for me. The moonlight struck her face. She was just as beautiful as I remembered her. She looked so peaceful, so content, so alive. Just as she had the night I came home from work. The day I had found her wedding ring in the trash can. My hand tightened around the handle of the hammer. I didn't want to do it again, but I didn't have any choice. After I finished, I drove back to my house. Our house. I walked around to the back of the garage and dug. It shouldn't have taken long. The grave was supposed to be shallow. It dug until the sun began to peek out over the horizon. I still hadn't found Mary. She wasn't there. I decided to go back. Emma's house was dark. I made my way to the guest bedroom. The bed was neatly made, untouched. I went to check the child's bedroom next. I opened the door and found myself in an office. No toys, no crib, no Mary. Emma insists she never had a child. My family thinks I ought to check myself into a hospital, but I know that it won't matter. I've checked into hotels, stayed with friends, and it still follows me. I can hear her laughing at me, teasing me. She keeps asking me to come to bed, and tonight, I think I will. I'm a scuba diving YouTuber. We explored a virgin cave cursed by evil. My partner Dave and I started a YouTube channel devoted to cave diving a few years ago. It became pretty successful due to some of our more dangerous and creative videos, but our new subscribers were dwindling. Our view count had plateaued and was even beginning to dip into quadruple digits on some of our content. We were trying to think of something interesting for a video, something that would go viral to put us back on top. That's when Dave suggested something. He said he could find an underwater cave for us to explore that no one had ever been inside of. We could document our journey into the cave, and that would surely get us a bunch of views and new subscribers. Using Google Earth, Dave found a spot on the map which he said was definitely a cave. There was a way to tell by looking for a specific pattern in the sand when viewed from overhead. Our channel is already pretty successful, so the travel expenses were no issue. And we live streamed the whole journey for our viewers, hitting some buzz going for when we actually explored the new cave. We had already begun promoting the video, telling people what we were going to do, even though we hadn't officially been to the cave yet, and I didn't even know for sure if it existed. We were still basing everything on Dave's topographical skills, something which I was beginning to grow increasingly uneasy about. "Are you sure about this?" I asked when we were on the boat, heading out towards the site. "This is a hell of a lot of overhead for a little blue spot on a map." "Trust me," Dave told me. "I know what I'm doing. This is gonna be incredible. A virgin cave for us to explore. Hell, we could even name it after ourselves." I nodded, feeling no better. Something in my gut was telling me this plan was foolhardy and maybe even a little dangerous. When we finally arrived at the place, there was no longer any doubt what we were looking at. Peering down into the crystal blue water, it was obvious. "Man, I don't know how you did it, but I like it," I yelled, giving Dave a high five. My thoughts of danger and worry for our lives had vanished at the sight of the place as I remembered the exhilaration of cave dives we had done in the past. We both laughed and toasted each other with a bottle of Sprite we'd brought along for the occasion. Neither one of us were drinkers, but it was nice to have something cold, bubbly, and sweet right before we started putting on our gear and getting the cameras ready. There was only so much light in the day, so we didn't waste any more time than we had to, and we were in the water shortly after arriving on site. The B-roll footage we would film afterwards, the two of us were way too excited to see what was lying down below the waves. 1, 2, 3, dive. The two of us dropped backwards over the side of the boat, plunging down into the depths of the calm blue ocean. Our weights allowed us to sink down easily to the seafloor. Going back up would be another matter. From this depth we would have to decompress slowly, rising to the surface gradually to avoid the bends. Like overshaken soda cans, I always imagine picturing myself opening a bottle of Coca-Cola which has been knocked around too much. If you open it slowly, it won't explode all over you. The same was true of the nitrogen bubbles in your bloodstream while diving at depth. Dave unspooled his tether, giving himself some slack, and then drove a stake into the ocean floor near the mouth of the cave. He spun it deeper and deeper into the ground to secure it, like an outdoor peg which will hold the leash of a rowdy dog. We didn't want it to come loose. He pulled on it to test its strength, then gave me the thumbs-up signal and began to swim forward into the darker blue water of the cave, leading straight down. The string on his tether unwound slowly from a spool he was carrying, like a giant fishing reel. It was like we were swimming deeper and deeper into an underwater sinkhole, an abscess in the ocean's smooth, sandy skin, a pocket created by an infection or a tumor which must be excised. I shook my head, wondering where these strange, horrible thoughts were coming from. Once we reached the edge of the entrance chamber of the cave, we had a moment to take in our surroundings. The most important thing was to check the current, so I tried to focus on that rather than the paranoid, delusional thoughts floating around in my brain. The water was flowing out of the cave, making it safe to go inside. If it was flowing inwards, that would mean a very short video and a quick exit, but it was clear to go in by the looks of it. At least for now, we would have to continually check the direction of the water flow, and we would need to get out immediately if the direction of the current changed. We gave each other the thumbs up and swam forward, heading into the mouth of the cave where it was much darker. So far we had been swimming straight down, but now we were going forward into a tunnel which began to gradually slope downwards. It was lined with pockmarked stone walls just wide enough for us to fit comfortably through. If it was any narrower, I would have insisted we turn back, but it was just big enough for us and our equipment. The light from above was blocked out and we turned on our lamps as I continued to record our surroundings, and Dave swam ahead, letting out a line from his giant spool of string. There were gaps in the craggy rock, black, empty places for creatures to hide inside. I tried not to imagine an electric eel or a shark emerging from those side tunnels, and found myself picturing even worse things instead. For some reason, I kept sensing movement from inside the holes which lined the edges of the cave as we swam deeper. There were things living inside the nooks and crannies of this underwater cavern, and they were beginning to notice our presence. The movement picked up, and I saw more and more flashes of what looked like fingers poking out from the crags in the rock. But I imagined they were the typical flora and fauna of an underwater reef, simply hidden by shadow, which gave them a more otherworldly appearance. And then I saw it. A hand reached out from one of the holes, groping and feeling in the air, seeming to sense us as we swam past. It was pale and bizarre, looking impossible in this place far down beneath the waves. Dave was too far ahead to notice it, but I actually screamed, dropping the regulator out of my mouth and sucking in salt water. Desperately, I struggled to get the mouthpiece back in, finally managing to do so with a panicky few moments of forgetting how to breathe. It's not as easy underwater as above, let me tell you, especially when you start seeing things like that. I raised my camera up to get a shot of the hand, thinking I would need proof of this or nobody would believe me. But when I found the thing in my viewfinder, I saw it was just a pale, flesh-toned starfish. But I had been so sure a moment before. I let the camera drop back down and hurried to swim and catch up to Dave. He was far up ahead now, and I saw the cave was getting more and more narrow, almost too tight for us to traverse. Dave seemed not to notice this as he swam casually deeper and deeper into the blackness ahead. Kicking hard with my flippers, I went as fast as I could, kicking up too much sand and dirt in the water but not caring. At this point I was too desperate to care. The mountain of rock sitting atop us was weighing heavily on me, and I needed to get out. My partner was finally getting close up ahead, and I realized he was slowing down to begin another spool of rope. The first tether was getting to the end of its length, and he was about to attach a second lead to it so that we could go in even deeper. He paused and began to work on a new stake, twisting a short length of steel into the sand by our feet. I tapped his shoulder and tried my best to get the point across that I wanted to leave. Now, desperately, I began to point towards the exit, making a symbol for choking that I associated with panic and fear. He looked at me like I was insane. He pointed at the camera in my hands, and the implied message was obvious. What about the viewers? Do you think they'll be interested in what we've recorded so far? The simple answer was no. Despite my fear and the hallucination I had obviously experienced, there was nothing down here of any interest so far. This place was just another cave. The only interesting part about it was that it was unexplored, and thus dangerous. We needed to go deeper to push ourselves to our limits. That was always Dave's way of thinking. I pointed at the second spool of tethering rope, making a hand gesture to indicate we would go to the end of that spool and no further. He nodded, attaching the line to the stake and continuing forward. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I continued after him, eyeing the pockmarked stone walls suspiciously. After the next section of the cave, I began to see things that didn't make sense once again. There were man-made items strewn here and there around the edges of the tunnel. A few cracked pieces of pottery were laying around, almost perfectly preserved in the water, away from oxygen and light. This made me take a pause, and I reached down to examine what I had found. That was when I began to notice the change in the current. But by that point, it was already too late. Dust and debris in the water could be seen whizzing past my face at an increasingly fast rate. And not only that, but the dust from the tunnel of the floor was blowing around, making it difficult to see. I flashed my light rapidly on and off, hoping that would catch my partner's attention. Dave noticed and began to turn around. His eyes widened at the sight of the tunnel behind him, as the dust was now creating a hazy fog which made it difficult to see. He started swimming back towards me when multiple hands appeared from the dark holes in the cave walls. Dozens of hands reached out like prisoners from behind jail cell bars, their arms not long enough to grab hold of him in some places, but others managed to snare him and wrapped him up tightly, snatching him and pulling him towards the wall of the cave until he was pressed up against it like a muscle attached to the hull of a ship. And then more hands appeared and began to pull him deeper and deeper into the cave, a conveyor belt made of disembodied limbs. A second later he was gone, vanished into the cloudy, dim water. His flashlight lay pointing up towards the ceiling on the floor of the cave, and I saw more hands reaching out from the ceiling, groping the air and inching towards me. I darted my eyes around and saw the hands were everywhere, reaching out and attempting to pull me in, like they had with Dave. I was about to go after him when the stake suddenly snapped as if under tremendous force, pulling our lifeline from its anchor and sending the rope flying off into the cave at 1,000 feet per second. Both steel anchors whizzed past my face in quick succession, barely missing me. In an instant, the entire rope was gone, and I was left alone in the increasingly cloudy cave. Hands reaching out to grab me from all angles, unsure what else to do, and completely terrified now. I took a deep, shuddering breath and started swimming out of that place. My mind felt like it was about to snap like a dry twig, my sanity on the verge of collapsing due to the circumstances, but I tried to ignore those feelings. I stuck to the inside of the tunnel, keeping a safe distance from the reaching hands, looking desperate as they clawed at the air. My friend was gone, probably dead or worse, but I didn't have time to think about that now. The current was getting stronger, making every inch of battle pressing forward, and I knew it would only get worse as time went on. Kicking my legs with every ounce of strength I had, I pressed forward, the tunnel's visibility down to almost zero in some places. I had to go based on memory and feel, which was the worst part since every time I set my hand on the stone wall I imagined a hand reaching out to grab me, clutching my wrist in its icy grip and pulling me deeper into the darkness. Luckily, the hands seemed to have retreated for a little while, as if satisfied by our first offering, but soon they would be done with the appetizer and would want a main course. I came to a split in the cave, which I didn't remember seeing on the way in. This gave me pause, since I had no idea which way to go. That was the reason why we brought the tether, to show us the way out. 100 different scenarios came to mind, including stories I'd heard of people trapped in caves just like this one, wandering a maze of unending turns with no way out as they slowly ran out of air. I checked my tank and saw I had some time left. But if I took the wrong tunnel and got lost, that reserve would be gone very quickly. Examining the two options for a while, I thought I caught sight of the faintest glow of light reflecting off the wall of one of the tunnels. That had to be it, I thought, and swam forward. This tunnel didn't look familiar, I realized, but then again none of them did. It was the first time I had been to this place, and I was starting to realize how dangerous that made my situation. I swam further along, seeing that the tunnel narrowed considerably up ahead. No, this wasn't right. It wasn't this tight getting in, was it? Hands began to reach and crawl from the pockets like pus escaping from infected sores, moving and crawling along the stone walls. The hands were stark, bone white, and I realized they could be mistaken from a distance as a shimmering reflection of light. Damn, they tricked me, I thought. This place is trying to keep me down here, to lure me in deeper. I spun around and left the probing, desperate hands behind, heading back towards the turn I had taken wrong. When I reached it, I didn't hesitate, going down the other tunnel quickly, checking my air levels on the way. The detour had taken up too much of my precious air, and I realized I was using it up too quickly. Breathing heavily like I was, I tried to slow down my respirations and tried to focus on it as a way of distracting myself from the otherworldly arms and hands which were now desperately clawing at me, hooking their fingers into my suit occasionally as I wrenched myself away. And then the worst possible thing happened. Just as I thought I saw a glimpse of actual light from up ahead, one of the hands reached out and managed to grab the hose from my regulator. It fell from my mouth as I was taking in air, and I was left with a mouthful of water instead. For a few moments I tried to fight with the thing grabbing my equipment, but then saw there were more of them now too. At least 3 sets of hands had reached out from one large dark pocket in the stone and now held my air tanks and equipment firmly in their grasp. Twisting out of the backpack attached to the air tank, I managed to pry myself free from them, then began to swim through the cave in a mad dash. My life was flashing in front of me as the light up ahead grew brighter. I knew I could hold my breath for a few minutes, but these were not optimum conditions by any means. Already I could feel my lungs screaming for air. Luckily, I had chosen the right tunnel this time and came out into the blue shaft of ocean water which led upwards from the cave. The hands were gone now, and I would have been relieved if not for the fact that they had my equipment, and I now had a fairly long ascent ahead of me, and I was not allowed to rush it. I had to take my time, or I would die from the bends instead of lack of oxygen. Swimming upwards in intervals, I paused for as long as I thought I could. Every 10 meters or so. I just hoped it would be for long enough. But as my head began to feel light and my vision started to turn black, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I made a mad dash for the surface, the white light of the sun blooming tantalizingly closer, but always just a little bit further away than I thought. My lungs were screaming for air as my joints began to ache and then exploded with agony, the nitrogen in my blood forcing its way out any way possible. Pockets of gas bloomed on my skin like painful, swelling pimples about to burst. I felt dizzy and nauseated and desperate for air, thinking I was about to pass out any second, when my head burst through the surface of the waves and I was suddenly in the open air once again, gasping in each breath with desperation. The crew looked at me with initial shock, but then started screaming for assistance and medical to be called in. I guess I looked even worse than I felt. All I remember after that is being lifted out of the water and laying panting on the deck of the boat, our production manager asking over and over again, "Where's Dave? What happened to Dave? Was he still with you when you started coming back up?" He wanted a rescue team to go down looking for him. He wanted me to show them where I'd seen him last. "I've got it all on videotape," I told him. "They can look at that for reference, but tell them I'm not going down there, and they shouldn't either. There's a reason why that cave was uncharted. It's cursed. Anyone who goes down there isn't coming back up alive. I'm done with cave diving for good. I think I'll start a cooking channel instead, or maybe I'll give TikTok a try. I think I'm being eaten alive." I heard the ringing of the bicycle bell right behind me and jumped to one side. "Get the fuck out of my way," the cyclist yelled as he zoomed past, barely missing me, and streaked across a puddle. The splash sent a gray ooze splotching onto my shirt, just beneath my left collar. "For fuck's sake," I yelled at his receding back. He gave me the courtesy of releasing one hand from the bike handle just to flip me off. I stared at the gray stain, pissed and a little grossed out because I could feel the gray ooze clinging to my skin. I was just glad I was headed home. Once I was home, I changed out and took a shower, but the gray ooze left a stain under my left collarbone, and I couldn't scrub it off no matter how hard I tried. As I watched some TV shows to pass the night, I rubbed at it intermittently. My skin was red and raw from the chafing, but the gray patch stayed. I gave up and went to bed, thinking that I'd take another shower in the morning. I stood in front of the mirror and stared at the gooey gray slime that wriggled around beneath my left collarbone. It vibrated with life, How did it morph from that gray stain to this squirming, animated thing? I felt repulsed, nauseated, and an icy fear that radiated up my spine. My first instinct was to grab at it, try to yank it out. My next thought was to show it to someone, to get help. But it was so gross, so sinisterly alive. I wondered how others would react to it. Would anyone know what to do with it? I doubted anyone would be able to help me. They would likely recoil in horror, run, and call up the authorities. Given how terrifying and out of this world this gray slime seemed, I figured I'd end up trapped in a lab somewhere, dissected and probed for experiments. I tried to pull it out, almost retching at the grossness of it all. But it slipped back into place, wriggling free of my fingers. I spent the next hour obsessed with pulling it out, but it wouldn't budge, wouldn't be removed. It just kept wobbling in my skin. I sat down, staring at the pulsating gray slime in the mirror. Perhaps there was a logical explanation for this. Maybe it was some form of parasite, something I hadn't heard of. Maybe someone with some related specialty would be able to help me out. Besides, I wouldn't be able to handle this myself. It was probably better to take the risk and reach out for help, hoping that I didn't end up in a worse situation than this. I got dressed, called into work sick, and headed to the nearest clinic. On the bus there, I began to feel really unwell. The spot beneath my collar began to throb painfully, and I had to grit my teeth and clench my fist to stop myself from reacting in an obvious manner. By the time I alighted near the clinic, the throbbing had turned into a sharp, searing pain that dug relentlessly through into my shoulder. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead, and I had to take a seat at the bus stop as my body went limp from the pain. I smiled weakly and waved away a kindly old lady who asked me if I was feeling okay. As I adjusted to the pain, I stood up on wobbling legs and took a step towards the direction of the clinic. The pain spiked, tearing through my willpower. I gasped and dropped down to a squat, curling my body as I tried to manage the pain. Someone helped me up, walking me back to the seat at the bus stop. The pain leveled off a little. Realization hit me, and I stood up again, ignoring the protests of the few people around me telling me to stay seated as they called the ambulance. I walked a few steps farther from the clinic. The pain eased a tiny bit. I kept walking, waving at the concerned persons hovering around me, and reassuring them that I was feeling much better. It was true. As I kept on walking, the pain kept subsiding. By the time I had hailed a taxi and made my way back home, the pain was gone. Once home, I took off my shirt to check on it in the mirror. It had started off as a little drop of gray sludge, one possibly passable as a really disgusting worm parasite. But now, it had become a grotesque, oddly shaped puddle of gray slime the size of an avocado seed. Awed, disgusted, and fascinated, I reached out a finger to touch it. It was warm, viscous. My finger sank into the first joint, and I felt the gray slime curling around it. I continued to press my finger in until I felt it hit bone. I ran to the toilet and retched. As I pushed the flush button, I noticed that my left arm felt heavier, stiffer. There was an odd tingling sensation running up and down the length of it. It wouldn't let me seek help, but that didn't mean I couldn't get rid of it. I thought of what I would have to do, and my stomach churned. I think I must have sat there for at least a couple hours, just alternately staring into space and at the wriggling reflection in the mirror. Finally, I mustered enough courage to get things started. I heated a blade with the stove to sanitize the blade. I hoped that my TV wisdom was accurate in that aspect. After the blade glowed a dull golden red, I took a few slow deep breaths and focused on the patch of flesh right next to the gray slime. I felt a rush of boldness and immediately plunged the blade in before I could second guess myself. I didn't get around to digging it out. I remember the shock of it all, the searing pain of the blade, the scent of burnt flesh, and then I passed out. I can't be sure if I had imagined it, but I thought I heard a shriek from within the gray slime. I woke up in a pool of my own vomit. I didn't remember vomiting. The blade wound was gone. The gray slime seemed to have expanded to cover it. I felt sick and completely drained. All my efforts had merely resulted in the gray slime growing yet bigger. I spent the next 2 days hiding it from the world. The gray slime's growth seemed to have given it some form of, I don't know, control. I might be going crazy, but it seemed almost able to exert its will directly on me at times. I tried to take a shower, but my left arm had refused to obey me as I reached out to turn on the shower. When I tried to use my right arm, my left hand grabbed my right wrist, tightened around it in a death grip, and it took all my focus and will to get it to let go. Staring at it in the mirror over the 2 days, I saw that the gray slime had crept its way outward and was slowly, but surely taking over my shoulder. I felt intensely revolted and helpless at the same time. I managed to duct tape my left arm to the window grill after having to fight off its spasms and jerks. That's how I've been able to type this out with just my right hand. The gray slime now extends from my left shoulder to the middle of my neck. It's all slime, all gooey, pulsating, rancid slime. The smell is a new addition. I don't know how, but it just started stinking so badly that it chokes me up whenever I try to take a deep breath. I think it's all going to end soon. I'm going to make another attempt to call for help. I'm also going to video this monstrosity in case the help doesn't arrive in time. I'll live stream it so no one would be able to stop the world from knowing this happened to me. I know the gray slime would likely expand, would eat up more of me the moment I try to make it known to the world. But I have to do it no matter what, because I have just begun to hear hissing, a deep, guttural hissing sound like a cross between an ogre and a rattlesnake. It was coming from the gray slime, which seemed to pulse ever more strongly with life and energy. The last straw was when I dipped my hand in. I could reach all the way in. Unlike the last time, my fingers no longer hit bone. My hand seemed to reach into some viscous space beyond my body. As I felt around with my hand, I looked at my back, half expecting my hand to begin poking out from behind, given how far I was reaching. But there was nothing. Was I bigger on the inside? What was my hand feeling? Then I felt something cold, bony and prickly grab onto my hand. It seemed like another hand. It felt like something had reached out and grabbed my hand. I screamed, yanked my arm out, dislodging it from the gray slime with a sick squelch. There were cuts on my right hand, where the fresh red of my blood mixed with the black ooze. The hissing continued. Something is coming out from me. Something vile, something evil. I can sense it. I feel like I even know its intent now. It wants to take over my entire body. It wants to turn me into a glob of gray slime and burst forth into our world. I just had a thought, one that fills me with dread. The gray puddle, the gray ooze that the cyclist had cut through, splashing that damn ooze onto me. Was it once a person too? Has there already been someone who had been engulfed by that gray slime? Was there something that had already come out into our world? I can't do this any longer. I need help. I would die trying. I can't let this thing turn my body into slush, can't let it get out. I'm posting a live video right after this and calling the police with my work phone at the same time. Wish me luck. One of them got me. I'm as good as dead. Seems like the perfect time to start a diary. I spend all of my daylight hours scared and alone in this musty old cellar. It's woeful, and I bet it smelled this bad even before everything around here turned to crap. Great, my second sentence, and I've already resorted to swearing. When I decided I'd start this diary, 5 minutes ago when I got a tiny sliver of signal, I thought it would be my poetic and deeply moving goodbye to the world. Maybe I'd write about love and loss, or maybe the splendor of nature. Then, when all is done and dusted, I'd have left something to be remembered by, as well as my corpse, of course. This was a bad idea. Okay, I'm an idiot. There's nothing else I can do down here. I've rooted through every cardboard box 100 times, organized and reorganized my supplies. I've even built a fort. So, I'm back. Hello, again. God, this diary is going badly, but there's just enough light coming through the boards I nailed over the cellar's tiny window to type by, so I may as well type. Stop me staring up at the window just waiting for a shadow to pass by. Maybe I'll just write and not hit submit. Anyway, where to start? Well, my name is, actually, I think I'm going to refer to myself as X. That sounds mysterious. If you're reading this and want to know my real name, I still carry my purse. My rail card is in there, and if you really want to know who I am, go find me and fish it out. I won't bite. So, my name is X. I live in a little English village in the middle of nowhere. Before all this happened, I had a mom, a dad, a sister, and there was a guy I liked. His name was Jonah. I couldn't think of anything else to write, so I waited until I came back from my rounds. That's the stupid name I have for when I go outside at night scrounging for stuff. Drinks are the hardest. I only trust bottles or cans, or did, and I was running out of places to search for them. But I guess that doesn't matter now. My leg is doing all right actually. Didn't hold me up at all. I saw Jonah too. He's looked better, I have to say. It's strange because this is only the second time I've seen him since we came here. Maybe his ears were burning. Anyway, I found some tinned pineapple in a creepy old caravan I hadn't searched yet. Had to bust the door open with Old Trusty, which I thought might attract some unwanted attention. But it was fine. I'm actually eating the pineapple right now. It tastes good. I also found a radio there. I already have 3 down here, but none of them work. Not that the caravan radio works either, all you get is static. It's just nice to collect something, to have a hobby. I can tell the sun is rising. I managed to sleep for a couple of hours, but I woke up after a bad dream. I know some people can remember their dreams, but I never do. I wake up and grasp at them, but I never manage a hold before they fade away. It's like trying to pinch the corner of a wisp of smoke. The harder you try, the quicker it fades to nothing. I'm just left with a sensation, a kind of imprint which sums up the most intense part of the dream. And a cold sweat. That's new. I've been through the box of photo albums I found at the back of the cellar again. I've looked through them a few times now, but I always notice something new. There's a photo of this little girl playing with a pretend guitar. I can tell it's pretend because it doesn't have strings, only brightly colored plastic dials. Kind of like my first Guitar Hero or something. The girl has dark hair and she looks a tiny bit like my sister did a million years ago. I don't have a picture of my sister. I suppose I could go and get one from my old house, but it's right in the middle of the village. I'm lucky I wasn't torn to shreds the last time I went back. So, what I've done is put this girl's photo in my back pocket as a substitute. I guess I should probably write something about my real sister now, but I don't think that's a good idea just yet. Daylight is starting to fade and I'm getting ready to go out on my rounds. I always take my satchel with me, packed with useful objects. I have Old Trusty, a crowbar which sticks out of the top for easy access, a small toolbox, a pair of heavy-duty gloves. There's a good story about how I got those. I might write that one down later. And a hammer. I carry a penknife I found down here in my pocket, my purse and phone, and a torch in my hand. I don't like to use the torch because its battery is running out and there's always the chance it might attract them. I probably shouldn't have used it last night when I got back. Maybe I'm starting to enjoy this writing malarkey. I need to be careful with luxuries. Okay, that could have gone better. Picture the scene. I'm using Old Trusty to try and lever a kitchen window open, when one of them just walks right through the garden hedge. Seriously, straight through it. It's not the mightiest of hedges, but still, it just appeared like it was walking through one of those Japanese paper walls. My satchel was on the ground, but I legged it anyway. I'm not stupid. I know I can go back for it tomorrow. I felt strangely naked without it on the way back here though. Like I said before, I need to be careful with the torch, so I think I'll try and get some sleep now. I slept pretty well last night, no nightmares or cold sweats. Maybe a midnight chase was just what I needed to blow away the cobwebs. I actually woke up wondering about you. If you're reading this, who are you? If you're like me, living through this village nightmare, how have you managed to go this long without being killed or whatever? Maybe you're in the army or some such. Maybe you're just some kid who's played so many video games that surviving all of this was already second nature to you. Or maybe you're like me, living on borrowed time and searching for a good place to die. Maybe future me was brave enough to tap submit on my diary, and you're currently reading this on your phone or computer. Here's an idea. Maybe you can carry on this diary from wherever I left it at. God, I really hope this isn't my last entry, although I suppose any entry might be. If you do carry the diary forwards, and I'm a corpse, maybe it will become cursed. Spooky. I've been preparing for my next excursion. If I know I'm going somewhere I'll likely run into an ugly, I like to take extra precautions. And I want my satchel back. It was a present from my dad, and I know it cost him a lot of money. So, I'm taking a pair of shears from the shelf of old tools down here. That way, if I lose Old Trusty, I'll have a backup weapon. If you are local, I wonder how you like to kill them. Pretty morbid question, I know, but everyone around here seems to have their preferred method. The last villager I saw alive carried a pair of mini cricket bats and seemed to have bludgeoning down to an art form. He never saw me though. I was watching from a grove of trees as he killed his way along the main road near the village. That was before I decided to stay inside during the daylight hours. We can at least see a little bit at night, ambient light and everything. They can't though. I've seen them. They bump into things. It's pretty funny to be honest. If they hear a noise, they walk in the direction of the sound, never trying to avoid any object in their path. They either bash said object out of the way, or, like that hedge, blunder right through it. Obviously bigger things stop them dead. Though, if that happens, they sort of shuffle backwards and then try again a few times. Eventually, and I've seen this too, they just give up and stand there, waiting for something else to attract their attention. That's not how it works in the daytime though. I think it's about an hour before the sun sets, so it's nearly time to head out. I'm going to change my bandage. 1 minute. Okay, it didn't look that bad really. The original scratch wasn't too deep and now the wound seems to be doing that scabbing thing I remember from normal injuries. It just doesn't smell very good. A bit like when you walk past a bin that needs emptying. Anyway, I've applied more antiseptic and redressed it. Time to go. That was fun. I'm glad I had those shears with me. I got my satchel back, you'll be happy to know. And I got inside that house I'd been trying to break into as well. More through necessity than choice in the end. But I'm pleased I did. I found more batteries. That means I can justify riding at night a bit more. In fact, the people who used to live there, I think the husband owned the local garage, were pretty well kitted out. There were a lot of tins in their cupboards, and they'd even left a shotgun. It wasn't loaded though. Not that I need a shotgun. I didn't tell you this before, but I have my grandpa's old service revolver. He always told me and my sister that it was decommissioned, but my dad apparently knew otherwise. I keep it tucked into the back of my jeans at all times. It had 3 bullets. One of them was gone, so only 2 left. I'll only be needing the one, of course. Morning. I'm feeling pretty low today. I think concentrating on getting my satchel back took my mind off things, but now I feel pretty deflated. Surely that's understandable. The village I knew and loved has been replaced with this sodding hell. I miss my family, my friends, TV and hot dinners and Instagram. Before all of this, I was a pretty positive person. Sure, I had a bit of trouble getting up in the morning, but once I was up, that was it. I'd meet the day's challenges head on, try to enjoy myself as much as I could. Not today though. Maybe if I write about Jonah, I'll cheer up. Not Jonah as he is now, of course. Jonah when he was all smooth-skinned, curly-haired and bright-eyed. Now he's like the anti-Jonah or something. His face looks like it lost a fight with an angry lobster. No, wait, I'm supposed to be writing about Jonah version 1 here. He's one of those people that I can't remember meeting. My family has always lived around here, and so there are lots of people who have just always been. If you get me, I always thought we would drunkenly get it together at a party. That's what I'd usually do if there was a boy I liked. Classy, I've perked up a bit. Out of sheer frustration, I went upstairs. Naughty, I know, and looked out of a window. Sure, I saw an ugly, wandering aimlessly as they always do, but I saw that the trees are starting to turn too. That means it's nearly autumn, and I love autumn. My sister and I always used to go out and kick leaves at each other in the autumn. I don't know if it was because of her low center of gravity, but my sister was amazing at it. She could somehow whip up a blazing whirlwind of golden yellow and fire red, surrounding us both in a leaf storm that I couldn't help but flail my arms madly. Then we'd both fall backwards into the leaves laughing, me wondering how on earth what had happened was possible. She was that good. God, I let her down in the end. I think I'll stay away from the house with the shotgun tonight. It usually takes a day or 2 for a group of uglies to disperse once they're all riled up. I could use the rest of that tinned food, I suppose, but I've got plenty to be getting on with for now. Instead, I think I'll swing by another farmhouse I was scoping out before I decided to turn nocturnal. I never met the people who used to live there, but I remember Mom telling me they liked their privacy. I'm sure they wouldn't mind me visiting now though. Also, there's a woodland between here and there, and I might be able to find some leaves to kick about a bit. I think that would make me feel close to my sister again. I'll check back in later. I'm still alive, but only just. I made it through the woods just fine. Only the odd leaf on the forest floor at the moment though. Sadly, the trouble started at the farmhouse. I couldn't get in. The doors and windows were barricaded, so I tried one of the outbuildings. Locked. It had a cat flap through. My first instinct was to leave it, but then I wondered if there might be something useful inside. Lord knows what I'm thinking about now. I lifted the cat flap with one hand and shone the torch beam through with my other. That's when an ugly dove at my pinkies. Luckily, it misjudged its leap and got a mouthful of plastic cat flap instead. As for me, I fell backwards onto my bum. Next, the damn thing started bashing on the door from the inside. I don't think it could ever have got out, but the noise attracted more uglies from out of nowhere. I only just managed to outmaneuver them and hightail it back into the woods. That's not the worst of it though. On the way back, my leg started to hurt a lot. I woke up this morning and I'm walking with a limp. It's funny, Dad had a limp when he and Mom died. He was nailing planks of wood across our windows and doors because there was no signal, as per bloody usual. And we thought that what was happening here was probably happening everywhere. It's only recently that I realized this was an isolated, local outbreak. Anyway, Dad dropped the hammer onto his toe. He was always useless at DIY. I think it was only a couple of hours after that when he and Mom were taken. It was like a wave of death. No, not like. That's exactly what it was. A horde of uglies swept through the village, probably originating from the secret research facility in the woods we're not supposed to know about. My sister and I wouldn't have had a prayer if Mom and Dad hadn't charged down the first few that got into our house. They gave us just enough time to escape, to run away. and leave them to die. My sister was screaming all the way, and I had to drag her like she was 4 again. She wouldn't speak to me for a few days after that. I didn't blame her. I hated myself too, but I would have hated myself even more if I hadn't done what I did next. On my own, I snuck back into our house with the crowbar I found here. Then I dispatched my parents. I can't bring myself to type it any other way. It wasn't like in the movies. I didn't pound their skulls into mush while sobbing. Why? Over and over again. I just found them, or what was left of them, forced the crowbar through each of their eye sockets, and came straight back here. Then came the crying. I haven't told you about the heavy-duty gloves yet, have I? After I got back from our old house, my sister started speaking to me again. A shared, day-long cry will do that for sisters. Once we felt up to it, we decided to explore the parts of the farmhouse we hadn't searched yet. All the bedrooms were empty, only a few belongings flung about the place. I suspect the previous tenants left in a hurry. The problem came when we investigated the attic. Once we'd opened the ceiling panel in the upstairs hallway, once we'd pulled the compact staircase down, I went up. My sister stood at the top of the hatchway shining the torch beam over my shoulder, and that's when it touched me. Terrified, I fell to my left, screaming as the thing came crashing down on top of me. I was yelling things like, "Shoot it," and "Run," but my sister was just laughing her head off. I soon realized that my attacker was in fact a shop window mannequin. I think the people who previously lived here must have been arty or into some seriously freaky stuff, because the mannequin was dressed in scarves, bandanas, ties, watches, loads of things. The rest of the attic was pretty empty, but at least we got the mannequin's gloves. I'm not feeling good at the moment. I've got a sore throat and I've coughed up blood a couple of times. My leg pain is getting worse too. I don't think I'll go out tonight. I have enough tins left, and one of them is a full English in a can. Sounds pretty disgusting, but intriguing at the same time. I've been saving it for near the end. A sort of consolation prize. There are 2 mattresses down here. Obviously one is mine, and the other one was my sister's. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it. I don't have a photo of her, only Guitar Girls. Her bed is the only thing of hers I have left, and she didn't even sleep in it that many times. The tinned full English was vile. You've got to laugh though, what else can you do? I'm crying as I write this. Tears of sorrow, shame and regret. It happened as we were searching a cottage just off of the main road. We'd used Old Trusty to get inside, and I'd rushed straight into the kitchen to find the food. We'd run out more than a day before and I was famished. My sister followed me into the kitchen, a wide grin on her pretty little face because I was sitting there with an open can of beans. Then one of them came at her from behind. I must have walked right past it on my stupid way to the cupboards. It bit into her neck and blood gushed over the tiles in a torrent. As she yelled out in agony, I leapt up and implanted the crowbar right into the thing's skull. It crumpled to the floor, but the damage was done. Don't let me lose myself. That was the last thing my sister whispered to me before she passed out. Her wound was much more severe than mine is, and much closer to the brain. That seems to make it quicker. I took Grandpa's revolver from behind my back and blew her brains out. I buried her in the back garden. After my sister died, I went kind of crazy. I took Old Trusty out across the fields and pulverized every ugly I could find. I don't even remember it that well. It was just find, kill, find, kill. We'd only been going out in daylight before then, but in my anger, I carried on through the nights. That's how I learned about their inability to evade in darkness. Eventually, though, one got me. I found 3 munching on a dead cow and ran straight at them. Took out the first 2 easily enough, but the third managed to scratch my leg with a bloody fingernail just before I clobbered it into oblivion. Once I realized its nail had broken the skin, it was like a switch had been flicked inside me. That's it, I'm dead too. I lost my bloodlust and came back here. If none of this had happened, I think my sister would have eventually gone into medicine. I was doing okay at college, but she was top of her class at school, and she had a really kind nature too. She'd never squish any bugs that got trapped in our house. She'd get a glass, scoop the little critter up, and seal it inside with a book. Then she'd take it outside and release it, even if it was a wasp. I've decided that here's not the place. I'll hit submit on this diary, and then I'm going to do it in those woods I wrote about. I'll be able to find a nice spot there to sit and look at the trees. Some place that's calm and peaceful. I'm going to leave the picture of Guitar Girl in this cellar. She belongs in this house. The tree leaves will remind me of my sister more than any photo ever could anyway. I guess all that's left to say is thank you for listening. I know it's possible that no one will ever read this, but that's not really the point, is it? Love, X. My basement just collapsed into an old mine shaft. Please help. Last year, my husband and I bought a house. It was pretty cheap on account of it being pretty small and off the beaten track. We thought we'd gotten a good deal until the basement caved in. It happened in the middle of the night. I woke up at 3:30 a.m. to a loud crash that caused the windows to rattle. Terrified that someone had broken in, my husband Roger and I grabbed our mace and combed the entire house. It was Roger who found it first. Diane, I found him standing at the top of the stairs, looking pale. He pointed down to where our basement floor was simply gone. What the fuck? I whispered. Both of us were too scared to go down the stairs, but upon closer inspection we noticed it was really only half the floor missing. The area behind and around the stairs seemed intact, while beyond the stairs was a huge hole that seemed to go down at least 10 feet. We couldn't see the bottom from the dim light the basement bulbs cast. The next few hours after that were devoted to frantically calling our home insurance and having the police, fire department come. They told us this had actually happened a few times before in our area. Apparently a lot of smaller mines here went unregistered during copper mining in the 1600 seconds. People just built homes over them without even knowing. While I'm thankful for their help, the firemen and police officers were honestly a little rude. They immediately cordoned off the basement and wouldn't let us get anywhere near it. It's really dangerous, they said, but that didn't stop them from going into the basement. They were down there for hours. Insurance would most likely cover the repairs, but the house would be unsafe to live in until it was fixed. Thankfully, our elderly neighbor, Gertrude, offered for us to stay with her. I could use some help around here anyway, she said with a smile. It was almost midnight when we got into bed, exhausted from a day of moving and calling contractors. But just as I pulled the covers over me, I realized, shit, I forgot my rings. I don't sleep with my engagement or wedding ring on. And in the chaos of everything, I forgot to bring them over. Rings, my engagement and wedding ring. They're still on the nightstand. You can get them tomorrow, Roger grumbled. What if the house collapses before then? It won't. I'll just go over there quickly and get them. Now, I nodded. Then I got out of bed, pulled on my jeans, and started downstairs. The house was quiet. Gertrude had already gone to sleep. I snuck out as quietly as I could, then raced across her lawn and into ours, ran up the porch steps, pushed the key into the lock, and swung the door open. The house was completely silent, still, dark. It was weird seeing everything so empty. I'd arrived at an empty house before, but not in the middle of the night like this. I flicked on the light and went upstairs. I walked into the bedroom, grabbed the rings off the nightstand, and turned around, started for the stairs. I froze. Is someone in the house? I glanced around, clutching the rings to my chest. Then my eyes locked on the front door. I'll run down the stairs and out the door. They won't get me. They won't. I whipped around. It was the bedroom door. I was just there. No one's in there. I frowned, watching as it pushed open another inch. And then stopped. There was a draft coming from somewhere. I went downstairs and looked around and immediately noticed the problem. The basement door was open. One of the firemen must have left it open. I walked towards it, slowly. Even though I knew it was just a simple mistake, my heart was hammering in my chest. I grabbed the edge of the door and started to push it closed. Drip. The sound was soft, like a tiny drop of water falling from our basement and hitting the floor of the mine below. Unable to stop myself, I turned to look down. The stairs descended into the darkness. I could barely make out the concrete floor and the jagged edge where it gave way to the mine. My hand tightened on the doorknob. I wonder how far down it goes. In all the commotion from earlier, we didn't get much time to really inspect the damage. The firemen kept us far away from the basement opening, telling us how dangerous it was, how it only took one wrong step. I rummaged in my pocket and found a bobby pin. I held my breath and threw it in. 1,000, 2 1,000. 3 seconds passed before I heard the light think of it hitting rock. My physics is rusty, but I don't think that mine is only 12 feet deep, like the officer told us. My heart pounded faster. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The light didn't reach the bottom, just some wet, glistening rock near the top of the hole. I could see one of our plastic storage bins, spilling out childhood drawings and stuffed animals into the hole. The breeze blew up from the basement, softly fluttering through my hair. Echo, I called down. My blood ran cold. I dropped the rings. Clink, clink, clink as they bounced down the steps. They settled at the bottom of the stairs. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I grabbed the door and slammed it shut. because, I swear, mixed in with the overlapping echoes of my own voice, there was a second voice, something that I could tell, on a primal level, did not belong to me. I ran out of the house and back to Gertrude's, locked the door and snuggled in bed. Roger is already asleep, and I don't want to tell him about it anyway. He'll just think I'm crazy. He doesn't believe in any kind of paranormal stuff, and there's no way there's just some random person hiding down in our sinkhole. Right, I'm in bed now, hopefully safe at Gertrude's. But what should I do? Should I go back to the house now? Or maybe in the morning? Not that the light helps. The basement doesn't have any windows. It'll still be as dark as ever. I mean, the safest and smartest thing would be to not go back at all. But I can't just leave my engagement ring and wedding ring there. They're right at the bottom of the steps. It would be easy to just go down and grab them without even getting too close to the mine at all. What should I do? Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.